Okay. He does that thing on Facebook, it's free.
Yeah.
It's my
All right,
second
so
favorite effort.
what's up? This is the Nowhere to Go But Up podcast, and I'm your host, Sean Dustin. First of all, let's start with checking out the true crime documentary series, The Con. What Really Happened to Cause the 2008 Financial Crisis is now available in virtual cinemas. The first episode is free, so head on over to www.thecon.tv. If you like what I'm doing and you want to help support it, you can also go over to Patreon. And I'm currently loading it up with subscriber-only content, which is, my interviews will go on there first before they hit anywhere else. Commercial-free, ad-free, and announcement-free, and actually unedited as well. So the only thing I do to it is I change the levels to make them acceptable for anything that you listen to them through. And other than that, that's it. I don't edit out anything else. So that's available there. And if you don't want to be a subscriber to that, you can also go over to Venmo and PayPal and just help support the show there. And you can also get there through going through my link tree, which will be available in the description, and all the ways that connect to the show, plus direct play links and direct links to all of my links will be there. Today I am talking with Scott Silverman. Sorry about that, brother. Scott Silverman, and he is a crisis coach and an intervention specialist from Southern California. He's also the founder of Second Chance, and that's a Second Chance, I believe, is a nonprofit that he created to help at-risk teens and adults that were coming out of incarceration. So it was more of like a reentry program. So, hi, Steve. How are you?
You can call me Scott. It's okay. A lot of people
or
call me
Scott. Sorry, man. Scott.
It's okay. It's your show. And as you said earlier, you don't change anything. So, nothing like a live show. Yeah, anyway, yeah. Sean, it's good to be here and, excited to have a conversation with you and talk about what's relevant, what's happening, what's going on. And, here in California, we've got one of the, incarceration nation. That's what they call California.
Yeah. And unfortunately, Biden's new pick is just going to enforce that mass incarceration even more.
Well, I think... Well, obviously, as the old AG, but I think that, I think the prison system is, as what was it, the Secretary of Corrections for California most recently stated, and I think the National Corrections people finally have said out loud and publicly, our system doesn't work for rehab. And, since the majority of the people that are, incarcerated are around some sort of substance abuse or, distribution of illicit or illegal substances, clearly, my attitude, you go into I see that now in rehab business that I'm in. People go into a treatment center with a Oxycontin addiction and they come out addicted to heroin. How'd that happen? So, it's a very interesting world we're living in now. And I just got called by the local newspaper here in San Diego yesterday. I'm going to be writing an op-ed because, we spoke 5 months ago and they want to know how are things going since people have been, sheltering in place and, stuck at home. And it's bad. It's really bad. Overdosing is increasing. Suicide's up. Domestic violence up. Abuse is up. The alcohol sales are up dramatically. And, you don't have to leave your house. There's an easy way to get somebody to deliver everything you want. And, now that marijuana is legal in California, there are those services that we all know about that drive people around that are delivering marijuana. So it is a scary time because people are truly self-medicating at a rate now that we haven't seen before, just because they can. And, the government's sending people money. Hopefully they're going to renew that because we know our community needs it. And it's a very, very unique time. And I think we're going to see people expire before they even get a chance to go to court and be arrested and go to court and go to jail anymore. So it's happening. The overdose rate, fentanyl overdoses, for example, in San Diego are up 32%. And that's just not an opinion. That's a San Diego Organization of Governments. They did a study. And this was last year or the year before, and they haven't even started to count yet this year, 2020. So we know it's going to be, it's going to be worse. It's going to be worse. 72,000 people expired last year in our country again. The number is similar to more people that died in Vietnam. So we are certainly on a roll as a country, no doubt about it. And unfortunately, not in a real positive way when it comes to self-medication.
No, yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100% on that, and it is going to get worse, especially when we get closer to all of these benefits or these whatever you want to call it that the government's handing out. When all of these things expire at the final end of it, and these moratoriums are lifted, and there's no more relief, people are going to start getting evicted, because if they couldn't pay for it then, how are they going to pay for it now? And they're not working.
I mean, and we're in San Diego. I mean, the average price of a home, and I think I mentioned to you earlier offline, my wife's in real estate. So real estate is up, kind of like the stock market now, which is interesting, but they haven't been making new homes for a while. So there's only so much land. And to your point, the people are going to go right from subsidized rental unit into homelessness. And we already have in San Diego one of the worst homeless problems in the country. And California's got something like 50% of the homelessness. We haven't been on the air 5 minutes. We're talking about incarceration, drug addiction, and overdosing, and homelessness. And this is so exciting. I mean, we're gonna have to throw some happiness somewhere into this podcast, because I'm sober a long time now, but I have found that I'm grateful that I have a lot of elastic in the waist of my shorts that I'm wearing every day at home, and I don't have to be fully on camera anymore because not much fits anymore. But I understand other people have been having it. Yesterday I had a pizza. I went out for the first time in like 4 weeks to go pick up a pizza at my favorite Italian restaurant, and my wife and I ate the whole thing yesterday. It was great.
Yeah. COVID 25, man. Actually, I think I'm around COVID 30 right now. That extra little bit, man. It definitely got to me. But I mean, a lot of it was my fault too. I was doing a lot of interviews in the beginning of this, and I mean, I'm right by the water, so I mean, I literally don't have anything to do here except for work on my show and go hang out and take my dog to the beach every 3 days. So and plus I cook, so and I'm a good cook, and I like to eat what I make.
That's a great way to have it set up. I love cooking as well.
This is not a serving size to me.
Yeah, that's funny.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit about your past and how you got to where you were. You struggled as an addict with methamphetamine yourself and probably some other substances. So, how was that, and how did you get to where you are now? And throw in a little bit of how you got to build that foundation, because that's another thing that we share. I'm currently in the process of trying to start a nonprofit for exactly that same thing, for people that are re-entering society. They definitely don't get enough help while they're in prison, and they're way behind the starting line when they get out. So,
sometimes people used to refer to them as the community throwaways. Yeah, there's no, and I ran a nonprofit, as you mentioned, for 18 years, and specialized in the hardest to serve. That was my challenge. People who had multiple barriers, people who had challenges, and then grew into working with people coming out of jail and prison, because to me, it was an attractive client, because nobody wanted to serve them. So it's not like I was sitting in the room with 100 different social service providers and having to compete. Nobody wanted the customer. There was too many barriers, too many things they needed. But I found that people who suffered from institutional thinking and multiple years of incarceration had an interesting motivation level and some really attractive skill sets. And as a social entrepreneur, I tapped into all that. So to answer your question, I grew up in San Diego, family of 6, 4 kids. My family had a small business when I was younger, and I worked in it almost my whole life. So I had opportunity to do things a lot of people couldn't do. But on the other hand, I also worked holidays, Easter, summer, weekends, and that was kind of what I did. And I just found alcohol, and self-medication became an easy transition for me. And I didn't really realize until I crashed and burned at 30 that I actually had a problem. I mean, I I felt, and I was one of those smart people. People say, well, the way to know is to stop. And so I stopped drinking and just pick up and do 4 times more cocaine, or shift over to methamphetamine, or do more hallucinogens. So I found it easy to self-medicate, and I understand that. And then, when I got to a point where I thought, well, I like being around it, but I don't want to do it, then I became an unlicensed pharmacist. And that was a lot of fun. I got to meet some new people. And, back in my day, the DEA wasn't even involved yet. They hadn't even put numbers on any of the drugs. So you could walk into a Kaiser Permanente or a hospital, and when the nurse turned away from the med cart, they were in drawers. They weren't counted. There was no inventory. And that's what we used to do. We'd go in and just take baggies full of barbiturates and Seconal and, anything that we could, Oxys and Xanax and Valium. It didn't matter. So, and I had a buddy of mine, his dad owned a pharmacy, and his dad was a drunk. So he'd pass out at night. We'd go get the keys, and he knew the alarm, and we'd go in the safe. And anyway, that was then. And, fast forwarding through my 20s, continued to work, always worked, got high a lot. And then, I had a situation come up where I tried to take my own life. And that was on a Friday morning. And the next day I was in rehab. And that was November the 11th, 1984. And my sobriety date's the 13th because I was on prescription medication for 2 days. Everyone said, well, you got to start your sobriety date when you're not taking medication. So the 13th of November. And this 13th, God willing, I'll have 36 years of continuous sobriety. So I've been lucky. I've been blessed. My wife and I married 2 years before I stopped. So she's been with me through hell, and she's been my angel, the whole time. And when I left rehab, I was told I should leave the family business. I was told I should get away from the stress. And I ended up going to state voc rehab, getting assessed, figuring out what I'm good at. And they told me I could be a welder at a shipyard, even though I'd spent the last 15 years, women's clothing business. So I didn't know how that quite transferred over, other than the fact that I love working with my hands. So I answered the questions, what do you love to do? And I love working with my hands. And so anyway, I took the next year off, and I was on state disability and trying to figure out what to do, and got in the housing business. And then all of a sudden crack cocaine hit the streets, and it was just, the war was on. This is way before, cell phones. People had pagers and going to the phone booths, and drive-by shootings, and the violence was up, and the turf distribution. This is San Diego, one of America's finest cities, but it was blowing up, and people were, in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I remember the first drive-by shooting, exactly where that intersection was. So got in the housing business in the 80s. And, I started doing this thing called drug and gang eradication. I don't talk much about it, but it's actually in my book. And what I would do is I'd go into apartment complexes, and I would identify the distributors, since I used to be one, because I know how it works. And I would knock on their door, hello, it's me, Scott. Who is it? Scott, I'm the working for the management company. What do you want? I said, I'd like to talk to you for a second. The guy would come out, and I go, look, you have to stop selling crack. He goes, what? I said, you gotta stop selling drugs here. He goes, who are you? I said, I work for the management company. And the management company is, was hired me because the bank wants to get paid. And right now, all of the tenants here are consuming your product, and they're not paying the rent. He goes, that's true story, John. And I'm looking this guy in the eye, and you can hear some in the back room, that clicking sound, of a shotgun getting loaded. And he says, are you crazy? I said, no, I told you I'm working for the management company, and I'm here to ask you to please stop selling drugs. He goes, you got to be freaking out of your mind coming down to this neighborhood. I said, no, I went to school up the street. This is my neighborhood. Anyway, so a day or two go by, and I go back and visit the guy, and we chat, and he goes, look, you're going to end up getting killed. I said, no, I've been here for 2 days. He goes, where have you been? I said, haven't you noticed how your business slowed down? He goes, what did you have to do with that? I said, see over there? He comes out of his apartment. I said, that's my little chair. That's my little ice chest. And that's my little thermos. That's where I'm smoking cigars and drinking my Dr. Pepper. And I'm chilling. He goes, are you strapped? I go, yeah. Aren't you? Aren't we all? So anyway, I said, look, this is called Operation Interruptus, and you're going to have to stop selling drugs. He goes, he's looking at me like I'm nuts. And he goes, are you part of the Popo? I said, no, I'm just a private guy working for the management company. Why do you make me keep repeating myself? I've got a wife. I'm not going to listen to you like this anymore. You have a week, get your stuff together and find a way to get off the property. He goes, what are you going to do about it? I said, I'm going to stay right down there by the main gate. And your consumer is not going to want to walk around me because they don't know who I am. So, but by the way, don't move across the street because I just got hired by that complex to do the same thing. So I literally would eradicate, 40, 50 unit apartment buildings simply by being persistent and letting them know. I said, look, I'm not here to put you in jail. I don't want you to go to prison. I'm not going to have you arrested. I said, you get stuck on stupid, that's on you. But I need to get this property back to the management company so the management company can negotiate a deal with the bank, or the bank's going to come take it, and everyone here is going to get evicted. And since they're not paying rent anyway, maybe it makes sense to move on. And I said, whatever you're selling, and you and I both know what that is, you can do it anywhere. You just can't do it here anymore. You got a week. And then, 6 days would go by, I go back and check in. He had packed up. I brought him a couple cases of beer and said, look, this is your goodbye party. You have 24 hours. And you know what? 9 out of 10 times they'd move. And that I did that for about 8 years. That's where I learned some of my customer service skills.
Well, yeah, because if you have to remove them, then that's going to be a whole nother situation where the cops got to get called. And
well, they don't want to. It's interesting. I found that nobody wanted that kind of attention, and during those days that people were getting jacked, they were getting put away. So and most everybody was sitting heavy. I mean, yeah, the cash should be in one unit, the drugs would be in another, but if the undercover agents were there, the gang task force or the DEA, they would have enough, evidence that they could move on them. It just took them longer to get the paperwork. What I said to them is, look, why don't you beat the system and just move on? Because I'm going to follow you anyway. But at least this way, they have to find, legally file for a new address. You push everything back 60, 90 days, whatever it was. So, I wasn't trying to beat the system. I was just trying to do my job. And there were people who were addicted, and I took them to meetings. I gave them lists for different anonymous meetings if they wanted help, and what I wanted to be is a resource for the community. So I got a pretty good reputation after about a year, and I kept busy with that literally for almost 8 years. And then got to a point where I'm going to work with body armor and strapped with 3 different weapons on me, and all legal. And I just my wife says, maybe it's time that you try to do something else. So that's how I kind of got into the nonprofit business, is started working at a shelter, feeding people, and I loved it. And after about 6 months, I went to the head of volunteers and said, can I help some of these people get jobs? Do you mind? And they said, no, we don't mind. How are you going to do that? I said, well, I'm going to meet with some of the social service providers I've met while I've been here serving food, and talk with them. And I talked with them, and they said, look, Scott, if you get our clients, their clients jobs, what are we going to do? I'm like, wait, what? No, if you get our clients jobs, our case managers will be out of work, the executive directors will be out of work, the clinicians will be out of work. I said, how is that possible? I think at the time we had like 5,000 homeless people in San Diego. We're over north of 8,000 now in 2020. And I got so upset with this meeting that night I went home. I had a really bad case of the uppets and said, I'm going to start a nonprofit. Went to the library the next day, opened up a book, and that's how I got motivated to start Second Chance, a program about that, giving people a second chance. And it took a couple of years. I didn't know anything about fundraising. I knew nothing about nonprofits. I had to create a board. So everything that you're about to do, Sean, I mean, I've, we'll get you some funding and hire me as your consultant, and we'll get you a bigger place to live in. So, when I come up, I can stay with you. And I just love doing it, and people started referring people to me. But the people that didn't want to work with me before, all they would give me was the challenges, and I didn't care. Didn't matter to me. The bigger the gap in someone's employment history, okay, the more difficult resume they had to reveal. To me, I saw as a challenge, and I didn't see it as hard, because most people that I met who'd struggled had this resilience of survival, which to me was a tool that we would create a way to craft energy into the interview. And more importantly, find them something that they were passionate about so they could use whatever in their personality really helped them hook to that train. So that's kind of the story. And then I left that organization about 10 years ago after 18 years. I want to do something different. Now I'm in the substance abuse treatment business, which is something that never was on my radar before. And, just being in the rooms of recovery for so long, I got tired of going to funerals. So I thought maybe I could do a better job, and started out actually serving first responders, which is interesting because those are all the people who used to arrest my old clients. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, well, a lot of times people don't understand that, the prison guards, the police officers, they're all doing time too, and they have to be around the same things that you do. And, sometimes in order for them to be able to get through some of the stuff that they have to see, or, maybe they didn't want to take that single mother away from her kids, and, but their job says that they had to do it. You know what I mean? It can't be easy, irregardless of how you may feel about somebody. You know what I mean? When you're having to be forced with that emotional situation where you're having to rip a child away from his mother, out of her arms and separate them, dude, that's gotta be hard, man.
No, it is hard. And it's interesting because the average right now in our country, and this is what comes from being an SME, a subject matter expert. I've got a lot of this data because I appear on television locally every couple of weeks or month or so, talking about whatever's topical around the issues of substance abuse, addiction, distribution, because we're in San Diego, obviously a border town, but 15% of the country has an active addiction issue that will erupt this year, in a year, 15%. In law enforcement, first responders, it's north of 25%. And this is all self-disclosed. It's studied, and it's data that's out there. And the only ones who have a higher percentage are lawyers, who are 30% self-proclaimed, that 30% of lawyers across the country suffer from alcohol abuse. And that's just what they disclose. So if that's just what they disclose, there's probably a couple of other issues in there that they're not disclosing. But, it's a big issue, and something that I've learned about 4 years ago, because I've done a lot of information gathering, and a lot of it's just, there isn't a lot, because, who keeps track of it? Treatment centers don't want to. That of the 15% that are impaired, that leave the house each day, each one of them, me, would negatively impact 7 people every day. So think about that. So that means the other 70% of the population were impacted negatively by the 15%, which means 85% of our country has some sort of negative impact on a daily basis from people who are suffering. And you and I haven't even talked about the mental health side, the untreated trauma, and the trauma that people suffer, and it's interesting. You just said something that caught my ear that I've heard it, and it's been a long time, that those who work with people who are incarcerated, in a sense, are incarcerated as well. The difference is they get to leave at night, but processing what they've done throughout the day, they generally don't bring home to their family, which means they're internalizing it. And if they're not self-medicating, or they're not working hard on their own personal self-care in some ways, because they have a choice, processing it can be more difficult. Where somebody who's incarcerated, once you're in there, and I don't have to tell you this, you don't have a choice. You find a way to adapt, and you do whatever you can to survive. And so in reality, if you think about it, if you were to compare the two populations, not that an inmate has it better, but they probably have a heightened awareness of what they need to do each day to survive more effectively. So I would tap into those skill sets. And our placement rate, working with people with history, we used to call people who had non-traditional working past, that for every 50 people that started, 25 would graduate, but the 25 that graduated, over 80% of them would get a job. And of the 80% that got a job, 80% of those would still be working a year later. And that's a phenomenal outcome when you think about who we're talking about. So, it's exciting for me to talk about it again, because I've kind of been out of that field for a while, but I just got approached recently asking if I'd be interested in looking at something around working with people coming out of jail and prison, because now because of what's going on with COVID, they're just, they're dumping, misdemeanor arrests, people who are inside of a year. And they're also letting go of some of the seniors because they're too expensive to manage in prison. So And there are some, what was the state recently on the news, said they're going to close all their jails and prisons. That's a little scary.
In California?
No, it wasn't California. It was another, I don't know. I want to say Portland. Were they talking about it, or Seattle? I don't know where it was. Don't quote me, but somebody said that they're going to they're going to close their jails. And it was all over the news. I think a lot of it has to do with obviously this big movement lately, and all these, unfortunate deaths have been taking place with aggressive first responders who, for some reason or another, end up killing somebody, and it's not justified, even though they're highly trained. But they're human beings, and you have these stress levels. So I, and I can't even imagine that, because as there's probably people who should never get out, and there's some people that probably should never been wandering around the planet, but they do.
Well, I'm actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, is that I'm working on a bunch of that right now. When I was just talking to, when I was late to this interview, because I was talking to a woman who's serving time in a federal women's institution on a methamphetamine conspiracy to possess and distribute methamphetamine out of the Northern District of Texas. And there's a particular judge there, John McBryde, who is, everything that I've read about him, the one word that keeps coming up is a tyrant in his reviews as a judge, right? He's had some trouble with the 5th District Court of Appeals when he was down there. He has a disciplinary record there. And so he came up here, and I think if I read right, he was appointed by Trump when Trump first got in, right, to this. So I could be wrong, though. And so anyways, there's when this book came out, it was called The Burden of Proof, and it was a guy who took an interest in this. And I've interviewed one girl so far who got 400 months for just being a drug addict. It got sucked up into this indictment, which is on a conspiracy. You can't fight that. And literally all of the amounts of drugs were really somebody just saying, that's trying to get a downward departure in time, I sold to that person X amount of times, and that's what they used to get the amounts of drugs. So there was never any actual drugs, just somebody saying something, and then they going, okay, well, you sold to them what, twice a week for a year? And then they go, okay, well, that amount twice a week times a year, and that's what they would make their charges as.
They call that extrapolating data.
Yeah, I mean, this is crazy. And it's not just one or two people. It's in this Northern District. It was 150 plus when he started doing this, and it's got to be up to 600 now, that they're just keep tying people into the same conspiracy. And it's no different than low-level drug addicts just doing their daily thing, trying to figure out how to get their next fix, right?
Oh yeah.
And they call that conspiracy. And
somebody must have found a workaround with the law, and then they probably even went back to some old cases and said, we gave you had 3 to 5, you got 3, you're getting out in a year. Guess what? We're going to redo this, and you're going to be your sentence going to be extended. I could see somebody who's a knucklehead that doesn't, with the idea that thinking is, well, if they don't get out, we won't have the problem, as if the problem's going to go away.
Yeah, and so they were giving people 20, 30. 40. Some people even got life, and these people that proffered on them, that cooperated, that turned evidence against them, a lot of them have come out publicly and said, hey, and they've gotten out, and it's well, I guess I told on them, but I said it was 71 grams or 71 ounces or 50, whatever what it was, and they've just inflated it into whatever it is. So these people, when they were And I'll, like I said, tonight it will be the author of those deals. I'll be putting that on tonight at 6 p.m. on my Facebook Live and YouTube Live. And they didn't want to be on camera, so it'll just be me kind of going through and them. But yeah, it's crazy, and I'm kind of going to dive into that a little bit more. And then that's another reason why I wanted to start the reentry. As somebody who did reenter, when I came out, I had nothing but the clothes on my back, right? I had to start over 100% completely. By the way, that was the second time that I'd started at zero. I'd started at zero 3 times in my life, where I'd lost everything, and it wasn't because of anybody else other than me. I'm the one that caused all the problems and was the one who was responsible for that. But still, coming out of that, I mean, you still have to go through it, right? And it took years. And I'm not your typical person. I'm not in recovery. I did not go that route. I started that route. I just didn't in the area that I was in. It was more to me like the rooms can be cliquey and they can be high schoolish and they can be uncomfortable to a certain extent sometimes. And I just didn't when I was
Sean, it's okay not to be in recovery.
yeah. And it just didn't work for me, right?
Not every needs. Look, it's only 15%, so you're part of the 85. Just don't mess it up and corrupt the data by coming around. Look, I have this disease. Okay, I suffer from it. I look at it as a disease. Most of science does, and it's just something that happened to me. But it's like some people have diabetes, some people don't. And the funny thing is, all the things that I've done, I should have. I'm 66. I should have all this stuff, and I used to weigh 330 pounds. So I've been through most things that, and I've been lucky, knock on wood, because, it's in my family, but I haven't had any diabetes. I don't have any issues. And I don't take any medication, sometimes something for anxiety, but, under a doctor's care. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that don't have it. It's funny too, because people who take the position, that they're addicted, believe that everybody else is, and they're walking around untreated. So, it's interesting because I've been in the rooms a long time, but I also know one size doesn't fit all. And I also know that the people who live with the addict in some ways are in worse shape than the addict because they've been living around it. Post-traumatic stress, all the science around that says if you and I were roommates and you had just come back from the war and you were a veteran and you and I were living together and you had PTSD that was untreated, just the fact that I lived with you, I would get it over time because your issue was going untreated. Like diabetes, if you and I were living together and I had diabetes and I wasn't getting it treated correctly, if you were a good friend, you'd be my caregiver full time. And all I really need to do is get to the doctor, get a diagnosis, and start checking my blood sugar level and taking insulin, and then I could live a normal life. So to me, it's not a handicap. It's a disease. I mean, like cancer, like heart disease. I mean, hair loss at early age is not a disease, but it happens to some people.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was more or less learning what I could mess with and what I couldn't mess with. Right.
Right.
So meth, I couldn't mess with that because it definitely, I couldn't, it ruined my life. Every time that I tried to go back to it and try it a different way, game over. Opiates. I had a seven-year opiate addiction after that. And when I changed my life and did everything right, and and all that stuff, then I need to not be on any of those types of things, right? And so I stopped doing that. I just kind of weaned myself off using edibles, and that's pretty much the only thing that I take now. Is I'll take edibles for pain every now and again, or if I want, just to relax. Sometimes I'll just take a little bit as like a microdose, and it's the same thing that people would use Prozac for, or Zoloft or anything else. I think small doses of marijuana and psilocybin have the same effect.
And when I hear that from people like you, I just get pissed because I get jealous because I wish I could. But I know that if I started, I would open up Pandora's box. By the way, there's a great saying that Robert Downey Jr. has been quoted saying, he goes, every time I did cocaine, I broke out in handcuffs.
Oh, yeah. That one's been going around the rooms for a while.
Oh, yeah. No, I say
Yeah, an allergic reaction. To drugs and alcohol. Every time I use.
It is an allergy. There's no doubt about it. Every time I do it, I break out in, something stupid or black out. So, for me, I mean, that's what happens. It triggers that for me. I remember my friends went away from me when I went to because they're like, well, wait a minute, if you got a problem, I have a problem. And, I've been doing what I need to do to take care of I still stay connected to my recovery programs. I help other people and I do what I think works for me. And I've spent, years talking to people about it, this piece that I'm doing for the newspaper this week, an op-ed, is talking about what's different, and people, they are stuck at home and they can't go to meetings, but they can on Zoom. So, but that's different. Isolation's not good for people who suffer from issues. And I've never met anybody who does a lot of drugs that doesn't have other issues like depression, anxiety, sleep deprivation, insomnia, addicted to other things. So, everyone needs help sometime. That's my attitude.
Well, and this ties in a little bit with people that are coming out. I mean, you have high level people that need mentors and coaches, right? Mm-hmm. Well, what about these people that are starting so far behind the starting line that why wouldn't they need mentors and coaching as well? You know what I mean? As far as like how to,
I don't even think it's a question that goes unanswered. They absolutely, positively do.
Yeah. And so that's kind of what I want to provide. And I already have a model that has been working from a guy out of Texas, Richard Midkiff, or not Texas, Florida. And they're trying to get him back in prison. He got out on a technicality because he got sentenced to 39 years as a 17-year-old. They tried him as an adult, I think, and his co-defendant was the shooter, and he was the getaway guy. And they were trying to rob a drug dealer, and then a struggle ensued. The gun accidentally went off and killed the guy. His co-defendant got 6 months more than he did because he was the shooter. The family wanted him to do more time, right? A law changed, and it allowed for people that were sentenced with long times as juveniles to be able to go back and review your case to see if, something you could get a reduction in time or sentence served, whatever. The co-defendant ends up getting out on that. Then they turned around and had to let Midkiff out because he was supposed to serve less time. And so somehow there was a discrepancy, and the district attorney is trying to get this guy put back in prison. But while he was in prison, and you gotta check out this interview that I did on my Facebook profile with this guy. I mean, an exemplary model inmate. Started 2 programs, one of them which was called the Storytime Dads, which he started a organization that funded this, so it didn't have any cost to the prison, didn't have any cost to the inmate, didn't have any cost to the families. And the fathers would record reading a book to their children.
I know the program. I've heard of it. It's been around a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, he started that a while ago in Florida. And so I want to take that model plus the SAGE program that he's talking about, and he said he'd be happy to let me use it and do it wherever I'm at. And that's basically having all of these different coaches volunteering their time, whether it's finance, strategies, and getting whatever it could be that you could think of. And just having a program and having them go through that. And you can do that through Zoom if you wanted to as well, because you just have that person, the professional that's giving the class wherever they're at,
Well, it's interesting because what you're talking about, I used to label recidivism reduction programmatic criteria. And what was fascinating, you saw that letter I shared with you that I got from Matt Cate when he was Secretary of Corrections. The union and corrections, they didn't want people staying out. It's good for business when they come back. I mean, what's the last thing we'll say? They say and they hear is, "We'll see you soon." So I actually got the attention of Department of Corrections because we were actually reducing recidivism, and basically, and once we and we'll talk more about this if you're interested, about how we showed the taxpayer donor how by getting Johnny a job, making, even it was only $2,000 a month back in the 90s and 2000s versus costing the state $55,000, was a huge return on investment. And once people started to get that together, but again, I was working against 33 prisons in California. They didn't, 58 counties. They were so busy. And it's interesting as you move through your path, keep this in the back of your mind. I always, when I was in a room, I learned this a long time ago. I had to find out who cared before I started spending time with them. Because when you hear these presentations, and you say, well, who cares? I remember going to an event once in Denver, and this Robert Woods Johnson Foundation had done this 3-year study, and they wanted to understand why men coming out of prison had a shorter life. So there's 300 people in the room. I'm listening to this presentation, and I said to myself, I was invited and they paid me to come to this conference, and I said, don't say anything, Scott, you're going to get in trouble. So as soon as I said that to myself, I stood up and asked the question, went to the microphone. I said, can I ask a question? It's a great presentation, but who cares? And the presenter said, what do you mean? I said, well, you've just spent an hour telling about this great study you did, and the person in front of me asked you what's going to happen next, and you said you're not funded to do any follow-up. So my question to you is, other than the people in this room, who cares about the study? And then she said, I'm not sure I understand what you mean. I said, what I mean is, if there's 2.3 million people incarcerated in our country, besides us, the providers here who really care, who else cares? Meaning, if this information is only shared amongst ourselves, we have to find a way to get out of this silo to let the community know that everything that's being done at the level of long-term incarceration for inappropriate sentencing or around substance abuse. I said, I'm just going to use that as an example. I mean, when it comes to someone carrying a gun, comes to someone taking someone else's life or nearly killing someone else, that's a whole different ballgame, because we're talking about substance abuse here. I said, we need to find out other kindred spirits who care, so it doesn't just stay in this room, because we will never create systemic change if we're the only ones talking about it to each other. I got a standing ovation, but then I did get reprimanded by the people that hosted me, but that's okay, because hopefully, I was trying to raise some awareness that if we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to get what we've always done.
No, exactly. And I think that with all the technology, the Zoom, the ability to be across the country, I'm getting a little bit of feedback on your from your speaker.
Is that from my speaker on my computer?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that better?
Yeah, for sure. That's a little bit better. So yeah, I mean, it's it's just it's a tough thing, man, and it feels like it's almost I don't know. I don't know. I don't even know the word that I'm trying to get for it. It's like it's manufactured to be that way, And I don't know if it's an unintended consequence of what the actual mechanisms are or instruments are of incarceration. And that's another thing that I want to kind of take a look at too, and sort of a documentary thing about this conspiracy in Texas is like, when did all of the timelines with the when the prison system became for profit, as well as the law change when the crime bill was passed, as well as which you mentioned, the crack cocaine, the CIA bringing that in for the Iran-Contra type stuff. Though I think there's a correlation there, and it's all, what I mean, meant to get all these people and throw them in prison to fill these private prisons now. In the city of Florence, Arizona, when I was going through my transit from Las Vegas to Sheridan, Oregon, I stopped in Florence, Arizona, and do you know that city has 9 prisons in it? The whole city is nothing but a prison town, and it has 9 prisons, and everybody that lives in this city services the prison in some way, shape, or form. So, I mean, imagine how many people that is, and they're from all over the country, a bunch of different states, contracted to house their inmates.
It's amazing because in California, I don't know if you know this, I'm sure you might, but when they built prisons here, they basically built a prison, built a town around it. That's kind of how they identify locations for it. I mean, it's pretty unusual. We have one here in San Diego, close to the border, but at the end of the day, a lot of the, I'm trying to fix my headphones here. a lot of the prisons, like California prison, I never knew what that was. And that's where a lot of immigrants that are here illegally go and spend their time, and then they get bused back across the border.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And it's true. A lot of these, I mean, it's a huge industry. I mean, from Unicor to whatever the state prisons, whatever industrial work that they're doing in the state level. I mean, it's a huge industry, and they don't want to see people. I mean, it's almost like the same thing with cancer. I mean, they may have the cure, but there's no profit in the cure. And there's no profit in keeping people out of prison, unfortunately. And so
it's a big, it's still an $8 billion industry here in California. $8 billion. I mean, that's significant when you think about it. How is that possible? But
yeah,
it is. It's huge, and it's just one of those things. The union's still very strong, but and to your point, there's a huge need. So, and there's people in our community that are kind of ramping something up very similar to what you're talking about, and they're looking for connectivities, and they called me to see if I'd be willing to help. And I said, what do you mean? I said, well, we need some volunteers. I said, I'm not going to volunteer. I said, I come with too much intellectual property. And I said, if I'm going to sit at the same table, the same people that you're bringing in that you told me about that were doing this 20 years ago that created no change, I don't want to waste my time or yours. But if you really want to try to fix it, and they're talking about a mentor program, they're talking about putting people together pre-release, and so they have that handoff. They're not talking to a complete stranger and trying to figure out a way, why are they doing this? How do I do this? And they don't take advantage of each other. They already know each other. And, I think there's some real tactical things that we can do. And to your point, there's some really cool new stuff that's out there today that really can help get information on the inside, especially Zooming. And anything that you do, I really encourage you to film it. I'm sure you will document it, because then you can blast it out and imagine having content, being exposed to 500,000 people every week versus that are still locked down, and give them tools to prepare for, there are experts who charge a lot of money to tell people what's going to happen when they go in, but there aren't a lot of people that are teaching people what to do when they get out.
Yeah, yeah, and that's true. I mean, all kinds of different things, like even from starting a podcast. I mean, that's a skill. Teaching people how to edit and do all that kind of stuff. Another thing I was thinking about is why couldn't you? Like, you have all these people that are still in prison for marijuana, right? And when you can go and buy it from a dispensary, like there's one right down the street. I mean, why couldn't you have a nonprofit connected to a dispensary, and you're putting these people that have been put in prison that are coming out for marijuana back into the industry where they should have been to begin with? You know what I mean? And they're business owners. They just went about it in a different way.
Well,
so
they didn't have to get a license and pay taxes, but look, I was an unlicensed pharmacist. I was an entrepreneur. I wasn't paying taxes back in those days. And now that the statute of limitations is up, I talk about it all whenever I can. And to me, those were great skills. I call those transferable skills.
Yeah. So, I mean, why couldn't you, in theory, start a dispensary? You know what I mean?
You can.
Make the plants and you know what I mean, have all of that stuff going on, but also have it connected to the nonprofit, which is, the dispensary itself would be funding all of the whatever the salaries or the costs of it, and all of the money that you get in grants would just be for mentorship. And the cost that would come from, getting these people in that you're going to have, talk about different financing, how to, compound interest and how to be on the right side of it, which nobody ever gets taught.
Well, look, basic life skills, how to go get a job, how to go back to school. Some people have been down for so long. We used to joke about how, a mouse is not a rodent. It's actually connected to a computer. I mean, there are simple little things that it's not information that, obviously it's different today, the information highway, but still there's a lot of restrictions of what you can get and can't get inside. And I think it does put people as a disadvantage. But again, when you look at I call it the philanthropic chart of distribution, homelessness, now starts to ratchet up a little bit, but ex-offender, reentry, it's not even on the list. And when you think about what the public money requires you to do it, you have to get creative. You have to think out of the box. I remember years ago when there was a huge shortage with law enforcement. They just weren't able to recruit people. The military veterans weren't coming out quick enough, and they didn't necessarily want to go into law enforcement. And I remember approaching the sheriff, who's a colleague, and I just, he was just on one of our events a week ago. And years ago, we talked about this. I said, why don't we train people and he was on my board at the time, the nonprofit. Why don't we train some of the returnees to move into law enforcement? And he laughed. He goes, they'll never, clear a background check. I said, well, but how many of your people now are doing things that may not be appropriate? He goes, I understand your point. You're absolutely right. But, in order to get into a sworn officer position, you can't have an arrest record per se. So, because I thought, what a great natural individual that could really, deal with some real life communication with some of the situations that happen in our community. Homelessness, knuckleheads. I mean, obviously they'd have to be trained, and they couldn't, take their shiv out of their sock and stick them when they wanted to. But I thought it was an interesting idea. Didn't go too far,
I've said that same thing. That the best people, just like the best people to run this country are the people that help defend it, which are ex-military, and the people that help to build it, which are union members and, people that know what it takes to build a country. Those should be the people that are running it. And the people that should be police officers or at least some part of the policing situation are ex-offenders and people who know how to communicate with that element. You know what I mean? That aren't going to be nervous when they walk into a situation and be so quick to pull their gun and fire and shoot somebody. You know what I mean? You've been around that element. You're not really worried about, like me. I can flow in and out of any situation and be anywhere that I want to be. It helps that I'm darker complected, but I can very well spoken as well. I can move it within all kinds of different areas. So I always thought that as well. But I guess the only thing that we can do is be a liaison to that. But what does that really give you an option to do? Only in a serious situation would you probably ever be called I guess. So you remember the ghost ship warehouse and everything that all the fire that killed all those people in Oakland, the warehouse fire. So my sister was a liaison. It was considered a liaison, and they call her on huge things whenever there's trans individuals that are happen. I guess 3 trans people were killed in that. So she was called in to be a liaison to the community and kind of give information or get information, something like that. But it's sort of the same thing, it's sort of liaison role. But yeah, I agree with you on that one.
Yeah, look, there's all kinds of different ways to, look at the situations today and things that are, institutionalized that really need to be updated and create systemic change, which to me just defined as permanent change. It just takes a lot of effort, a lot of education, and a lot of patience, because where there's a will, there's a way. But again, you got to find those, who really cares. You got to find those kindred spirits. And, unless you just do it, one person at a time, which I've done as well. And I found that's probably the most gratifying. But when you've got something that works, it's nice to be able to scale it up so you can be an influencer. And, I'm going on this 3-day conference next week for Zoom for 3 days with 300 other people across the country called Mobilized Recovery. And most everybody there are going to be learning how to be advocates and leaders and change agents in the community. And I've been doing it for decades. So, and I'm just coming in as a participant because I just wanted to, refresh, reboot, sit and listen and just be part of, because I'm not sure yet. I'm looking forward to it. And the guy that's leading it and the group are pretty powerful, and they are change agents, and they've got the ear of some legislative leaders. But when it comes to substance abuse, addiction, prevention, there isn't a lot of conversations right now. Everything's pretty much focused on COVID. Now it's going to shift to the election, and then hopefully we're going to see some positive changes in leadership, because right now it's scary times. I'm kind of glad I'm hunkered down in my little clubhouse here.
Yeah, me too. I'm glad that I'm like, mobile and I can just hook up anytime I want and go if I need to, other than the fact that my daughter is, I have to be close to her. I don't want to go too far away from her, but I mean, depending on what happens, I mean, there's a lot of people that are making an exodus right out of California and New York right now as well. Both of these states are a lot of people are leaving. So who knows, man? Crazy times. So anyways, why don't you go ahead and we're about 54 minutes right now. So why don't you go ahead and plug any of your stuff that you want to plug.
Got it. Anyway, well, this is Scott H. Silverman. You can Google me anywhere. Here's my direct phone number, area code 619-993-2738, area code 619-993-2738. As a crisis coach and a family navigator, I really encourage people to call me or text me and let's find a way to keep the conversation going. Google me, look me up, text me, poke me, instant message me. I'm all over social media, and I hope to talk with some of you, if not all of you, one day. And I want to thank you, Sean, for the opportunity to have a great conversation today. And I gave you that contact info. You've got mine, but anything I can do to help support you in your journey, I'm here to do that.
Awesome. That's great to hear, and you will be hearing from me because
sounds like a threat. Like a threat. I like it.
I'm going to need some guidance on this deal. I've got an attorney that's helping me process everything and do all of the paperwork that's pro bono. So I'm just, just little bits and pieces keep coming from here and there, and at some point it'll end up where it needs to be. So hang out for just a second, and as soon as we get off of this, you can. This will actually be probably airing next Wednesday at 6 p.m. That's what I think I want to do with this one. And yeah, I appreciate everything. I appreciate your time. And thanks to Steve Joyner for making this connection. And we'll be talking again at some point soon. So until next time.
All right, man. Be safe. Take care.
You too.